Hey everyone, it is Marc Sabatella from Mastering MuseScore, and this is the Music Masterclass. This is where we're going to talk about making music, talk about different aspects of making music, but today we're mostly talking about rhythm because we are kind of staying in sync with what's going on in the basic music theory course. So I know a lot of you are in that course, and we're going to be talking about some of the things we've been working on there, but things also of general interest to anyone who has any interest in rhythm, which hopefully is all of you. So thanks for checking in. Always good to see who's here and where you're all coming from. And what I'm going to do is, well, first of all, as hopefully always during these next, couple of months while we're working through this course, if you have particular questions on anything from the coursework, this is a good place to ask. I mean, if you've already been asking in comments and in the community, great. And I've tried to respond and other people have been engaging in that. But if there's things that I can try to address right here and right now, things that are not clear, that I can help by explaining to you, in person, as it were, I'm more than happy to do that. And there is one question that came up that I thought was really interesting and an astute question, and I tried to answer it as well as I could, but I'm going to come back to it by showing this. This Elmar was the person, and I don't know if you are here, but the question had to do with these rhythmic patterns in 3/4. And I made the observation that generally speaking, we're going to divide up our rhythmic patterns in 3/4. Let's just say all we've got are eighth notes, okay? So we don't, because as soon as you have 16th notes in 3/4, it's every beat for itself, right? We're going to beam each beat individually. That's the kind of rule when 16th notes are involved. Each beat gets beamed individually. But let's say we have eighth notes, but not 16th notes. And now we want to talk about how we're going to do that. So the general rule is make sure you can see either beat 2 or beat 3. That's the general rule. So we want to break up some note with a tie or break a beam, do whatever we need to do so that we can see either beat 2 or 3. But when in doubt, let's make sure we can see beat 3. So that is what these examples here are. These examples where I say 2 + 1. 2 + 1 means 2 beats are kind of grouped together and then 1 beat is grouped together. So in this example here, there's a half note and then a quarter note. The quarter note lets me see right where beat 3 is. This measure here, there's 3 quarter notes. And again, I can see right where beat 3 is. This example here has 4/8 and then a quarter. And again, that quarter is right on beat 3. All of these patterns involve there being a note on beat 3. Like literally, like there's a quarter note on beat 3. Looks like this particular example doesn't show anywhere there's eighth notes, but here's some. So here's one where there's eighth notes on beat 3. So this is another example where we would want to do that. Now, in this case, in a lot of these examples, you can have it either way, right? If you just have 3 quarter notes in your measure, if you just have 3 quarter notes, pay no attention to these extra rests. He had put those in just to get some extra separation in there, but they're not real measures there. Just ignore those rests. So we have this measure with 3 quarter notes. And the question was, well, isn't this also 1 + 2? Couldn't we also say we see beat 2, that these are grouped as a group of 1 followed by a group of 2? And yeah, you could look at it either way. What I am saying is, make sure you can see one of those. Make sure you can either show 2 + 1, meaning we're seeing something on beat 3, or 1 + 2. So we're seeing something on beat 2. So the example I give is this one here, a quarter and a half. In this example here, we can't see beat 3, right? There's nothing. There's no blob of ink. If you have a quarter followed by a half, there is no blob of ink there, no note, no nothing happening on beat 3. It's just that half note being sustained. So this is an example of something that is not showing beat 3. But it's okay because we are showing beat 2. And that is the point I want to make. If your rhythm naturally is not capable of showing beat 3 without a tie, well, let's see if we can just break it up in such a way that we see beat 2 instead. And so in this case, yes, we see beat 2. So the question is, well, how would this ever change anything? It changes things if we have a rhythm like I'm about to enter. So I'm going to pop over to an empty score because I got an empty score up here. And let's go ahead and enter a 3/4 measure. So let me, I guess I closed my palettes here to save some space. Let me reopen them. Oh yeah, and I made this whole fancy presentation space expecting that I wasn't going to do any editing in here, but I'm wrong. So I'll go to the master palette and then time signatures, and I will pick the 3/4. There we go. So I have my 3/4. What if I have a rhythm that looks like this? It's an eighth note and then some quarter notes. And then maybe another eighth note. This is a rhythm in which I can't see either beat 2 or beat 3, right? This note here is on the and of 1. Beat 2 happens somewhere in the middle there. And then there's a quarter note, and then on the and of 1, and beat 3 happens somewhere in the middle there. So what I'm going to be saying here is this we need to break up so that we can see either beat 2 or beat 3. We want to be able to see one of them. So in this case, if you can't see either of them, we're going to have to break something up. So I want to break it up to show beat 3. I'm going to prefer that. So I'm going to take this quarter note and break it up into 2 eighth notes and then tie the 2 eighth notes there. So now I can see the first 2 beats together followed by the third beat. And this is going to happen when you have syncopations. When you have syncopations, you are going to get yourself into these situations where you have both beat 2 and beat 3 potentially obscured by a long note. So this is how we're going to break that up. So yeah, there's definitely opportunity for confusion there, and for like, and there's also some subjectivity in how these rules are applied in practice. You might have different editors making different choices as far as how they break things up. So for instance, the way I originally had that, some editors would actually say that that rhythm is common enough that we're allowed to break the rule. We're allowed to break the rule. Bum, bum, bum. So if we have that pattern and maybe it continues, right? Maybe that's also a, basically these are just a whole bunch of quarter notes that are all off the beat like that. Bum, 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 right? They're just all quarter notes and it's a kind of a repeating pattern. There are some people who would say this is actually easier to read. Even though we don't see beat 3, there's something about the consistency of the pattern that makes that better. So there's definitely a wiggle room in these rules. And I see Steinar is pointing out the first notation. And if by first notation you mean the way that I have it here, yeah, if you're accustomed to reading a lot of syncopated music. And so there's one thing where modern musicians playing in pop, rock, jazz, style, funk styles are very accustomed to these types of syncopations. Furthermore, that particular case of just a whole bunch of offbeat notes is pretty common in the classical world too, especially for string players. String players, for whatever reason, that tends to be a kind of a common string accompaniment pattern. Bum, 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 where the beat is going like this. Bum, bum, bum. I can't do this. I can't do 2 things at once like that. I should be able to. Boop, bum, 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 where the beat is going here. bum, 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 bum. I can't do that. That is weird. I can do all sorts of complicated things between my hands, but snapping and bowing, I've never tried before. So yeah, if you're accustomed to playing in mostly syncopated styles, or if you're a string player playing those sorts of syncopated accompaniment rhythms, you're very used to seeing these. So again, some editors will say, yeah, go ahead and leave that one alone. But then there might be, other situations where, you need to break something up, and it's subjective. So I don't want to make this all about you must do this, you must not do that. So glad to have that discussion. And I want to lead from there into another sort of interesting discussion that I want to get your feedback on. I don't know if any of you follow various music theory groups on Facebook or in Reddit, but for some reason, over the last few days, there's been this whole flood of discussion in various different places. I've seen it in 2 different Facebook groups as well as on Reddit about row, row, row your boat, and saying what time signature is row, row, row your boat in. So without me saying anything more, not even singing it, I want you to think about it and just tell me. Think through the song, sing it to yourself, do the math a little bit. What time signature would you write row, row, row your boat in? What time signature would you write in? Is my question for you. And then I'm going to talk through it a little bit and see if anyone's answers change, and talk about why there's not a right answer in the end. So Scott, I'm a little curious about your statement about change so much since you went to college. What I would claim is that music theory never changes. It's like the law of gravity. It's not changing until the Earth's mass changes, until our physical biology changes, until the physics of vibrating strings changes. Music theory is not going to change. However, perceptions about certain things do change. And so when you talk about what has changed, I would like to, maybe talk a little bit about what that actually is and what about that has to do with interpretation versus theory, because these are all interesting discussions in themselves. All right, so now I've got some answers about time signatures, and I've got like one of each. Right? I've got a 2/4, I've got a 3/4, and a 6/8. I got 2 6/8 actually. I don't have anyone saying 4/4 yet, but 4/4 would also be a valid answer. And so, yeah, the 4-part harmony of writing SATB, that's still a thing, right? I mean, it is absolutely still a fundamental thing. Yeah, Joanna, tell us how. Oh, it's written in 12/8 in eyes and ears. Wow, that's pretty incredible. So there's another answer: 2/4, 3/4, 6/8, 12/8, 4/4. These are all possibilities. There is no right or wrong about it. You might as well talk about what your favorite pizza topping is or whatever. There's not going to be a right answer. Now there will be some wrong answers, like trying to write it in 5 would be silly. You could do it. You could write it in 5 and just put your bar lines every 5 beats, and it would make no sense whatsoever. But let's not even talk about that. But I'm going to claim all these other answers totally make sense, and I'm going to conduct them. Here's 2/4. 1, 2, 1, 2. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. So that totally works. However, and Stephen, I see you changing to 6/8 because you would need triplets to do it. Like row, row, row. You might think, oh, those are quarter notes. This is great. But row, row, row your boat. You think about that. Row your boat. You might think that's a dotted 8th, 16th. That would actually sound a little different than how I'm singing it. Bum, bum, row your boat gently down the stream. It would be a little more jerky. Row, da, 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 your boat gently down the stream, right? Those quick notes would be that much quicker. We don't feel that normally, especially because we're eventually going to have merrily, 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 which is about as clear a triplet, 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 triplet. You absolutely need triplets to do merrily, merrily, merrily. And then once you realize that row your boat is also triplets, right? That's basically this. That is basically, that would be row, row, and then a triplet in which we have a quarter, quarter, and then an eighth, and then a quarter, right? Row, row, row your boat. So that would totally be, acceptable. You would just need to write it with triplets. And then whether you call it 4/4, is that one measure, row, in 4/4, that's row, row, row your boat. Then gently is the next measure. Yeah, it could be that. Or you could count it in 2/4 and have that be the next measure. There's not really a significant enough difference between any of those to matter. Now, you could also put this thing in 3. It would have to be fast, though, 3. So, dun, 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 dun. So that would totally be okay too, right? We could totally write that. We could totally write these as dotted halves, row, row, and then a 6, a half note, and then dum, and then dum. Dun 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 dun. Now those aren't triplets; they're just quarter notes. But I would claim that doing it with triplets totally works, but then you have to deal with triplets. Doing it in 3/4 works, but man, that's fast to conduct. Now, very often 3/4 is just done fast enough that people just say, think in 1. So you might not actually conduct that fast. You might just conduct 1. Dum, dum, bum, ba, dum, gently down the stream, and just conduct the 1s like that. And that's totally valid. Fast tempo 3/4 that you feel in 1 is all over classical music. It's all over a lot of scherzo movements of symphonies and sonatas and so forth. So now Jim is talking about swing, which is another way of doing this, right? You could totally, instead of writing this quarter, eighth as a triplet, you could write it like this. I could write it as eighth notes. Bum, 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 bum. And then just know that these are swing eighth notes. Gently down the sweet stream. Now, one thing I would say is normally swing eighth notes, and I've made this whole sort of controversial video about the fact that normally swing eighth notes are not quite triplets, but they can be in shuffles and so forth. But then usually there's sort of a difference in how we accent the notes a little bit. And so there's something about swing eighth notes that feels maybe a little different from how people usually do row, row, row your boat, but they're not totally incompatible. But there's no getting around merrily, 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 merrily as still needing triplets. But yeah, that was actually another common one that was in the Reddit thread. People were saying, yeah, 4/4 with swing. That's how I would do it. And yeah, these are not wrong answers. There's lots of right answers. But I will say, okay, so between 2/4 and 4/4, looking at the lyrics can make a difference. Row, row, and then row your boat is like one little phrase, and then gently down the stream is another phrase, and you might think one phrase per measure. But is that really necessary? There's nothing wrong with having a phrase take 2 measures. That's super common. Harmonically, there could be reasons based on where the chords change, and we all know that this is a round, of course. So I would say that lyrics are important, but they have almost nothing to do with making those time signature decisions. They have to do with making other decisions, but they have very little to do with making time signature decisions. Time signature decisions are based more on the rhythm of the music, the placement of the accents, the changes of the harmonies, or in the case of around like this, thinking about where that next phrase comes in, right? Because you all know we're going to go row, row, row your boat, and then you're all going to start singing row, row, row your boat right when I get to the gently down the stream. So you kind of want to make sure that those entrances happen on measure boundaries. So there's things like that you would want to take into consideration. But yeah, the point is there's not really right or wrong answers here. That said, my personal choice for doing this, because I would prefer not to write out all those triplets, not depend on people understanding swing, not have to think in one, write in three, but think in one. For me personally, the most natural way to do this is going to be using 6/8. So that's how I would do it. I would write it as 6/8. So 6/8 is basically 2 beats per measure. 12/8 is 4 beats per measure. But it doesn't really, that's like 2/4 versus 4/4. It doesn't really matter to me. So row, row, and then quarter, row, bum, and then dotted quarter, and then quarter, bum, dum, bum, 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 bum. So that's how I would personally write it. Now, would I write 6/8 or 12/8? I'm going to give you like a totally subjective thing, and I want to see if anyone agrees with this or not. I prefer 4/4 over 2/4 almost any day of the week. If there's any doubt between 2/4 or 4/4, I'm going to prefer 4/4. Why? I don't know. Because I grew up on 4/4, because most jazz today is written in 4/4, because all those extra bar lines that we need for 2/4 and all the extra ties across those bar lines maybe for syncopations makes the music a little more cluttered. So to me, unless there's a super, super, super strong reason to pick 2/4 over 4/4, I will almost always pick 4/4 personally. 6/8 and 12/8, I got exactly the opposite thing going on. 12/8's too many notes. It's just too much stuff to stick in a measure. 4/4, there's 8 eighth notes in 4/4 that you can put in that measure, right? I can put 8 eighth notes in a measure, and they're going to be beamed in this nice little grouping, 2 groupings of 4 notes. I can handle that. I can look at that and go, yeah, I got it. 2 big groupings of 4 notes. Got it. Under control. But in 12/8, I'm going to have 4 groups of 3 notes. That's 12 notes instead of 8, and there's 4 groupings instead of just 2. My brain starts to not like that. It starts to be too much. So I personally tend to gravitate more towards 6/8 over 12/8. That said, there's this huge tradition of those sort of rock and roll blue moon, right? That sort of 12/8 repeating thing. And yeah, those kinds of songs I do think of as 12/8. But there would be nothing wrong with calling it 6/8 either. So, oh yeah, and Joanne, that's a really good point. Scott Joplin and a lot of ragtime composers, when they would write these patterns, right, or variations on that back and forth pattern like that, they often wrote those as eighth notes. 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and. But the more modern way for people to think of that is as quarter notes. 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1. So here we're not just talking about drawing bar lines in different places, but we're actually talking about doubling the note values. So Scott Joplin's original manuscripts are usually written in terms of eighth notes and sixteenths, but a modern musician writing similar music today might be more inclined to write that in 4/4 with quarter notes and half notes. I mean, quarter notes and eighth notes, basically everything doubled. So, yeah, there's that. And then Chris is pointing out about Renaissance music, and Renaissance music is, Yeah, it's often going to have long note values, right? We're not going to have many eighth notes. We're going to have a lot of half notes, whole notes, and then double whole notes or brevs. And we're not used to that. We're not used to that type of reading where the half note is the beat. We're not as accustomed to reading half notes as the beat. So often rewriting those where we actually have all the, take all the note values and cut them in half, that's a lot more comfortable for a lot of modern musicians. So anyhow, yeah, these are all really interesting little bits of things to think about. And the thing that I want to have you take away from this is another example of something that I'm often telling you is that music theory is not rules telling you what to do. It's a set of cause and effect, unchanging things like the law of gravity, as I mentioned before. You can write this in 2/4 versus 4/4 versus 3/4 versus 6/8. Any of them can work. If you write it in 3/4, it's going to have this effect on how people think about it. They'll have to think in one, and maybe they're comfortable with it. It's a fast tempo. It might cause drummers, if they're drummers playing along, to think of it differently. If you write it in 6/8, people might think of it differently than triplets, etc. So there's not right and wrong. It's more about, if you do this, this will happen. And so then you get to choose, well, how do I want things to go? And yes, Jim, absolutely, who you're writing for makes a big difference. You know, writing in 6/8 only makes sense once you've been exposed to compound meter and gotten used to it. And often for beginning students, you really haven't mastered that yet. And they haven't mastered triplets either. And then maybe the 3/4 is the clearest way of writing it, perhaps. So, yeah, that has a lot. That has a lot to do with it, who you're writing for. So, oh yeah, and the link to eyes and ears. So I did put it in the theory course before, but let me just quickly. Actually, can someone else do that? Someone else just grab the link and put it in the chat, because you all can do that. If you can someone grab the link to eyes and ears that I posted yesterday or the day before, and just stick it in the chat. So all of that business said, now I want to jump into something a little different. First of all, I want to flip around and make sure that I'm making sure that I cover what I want to cover. So one of the things that I want to cover here is I do want to talk a little bit about these rhythm syllables. And I mentioned all the different systems that are out there, and people have posted stuff about their favorites. And yeah, there's no perfect system. If there was, everyone would have agreed on it by now. There's systems that individual people like for their purposes. None of them make me completely happy. None of these rhythm syllable systems makes me so happy that I want to use it all the time. None of them quite cross that threshold into it's useful enough to actually help me. But some of them come closer than others. Thanks, Victor. Thanks for the link there. So actually, since you got that there, let me go ahead and just click the link so I can actually see the number 25 that Joanne is talking about, because I don't know which one that is. 25, and I assume that's 25 in hey, look, oh, they've got row, row, row your boat. Okay, so it's page 16. I see. So let's take a look at their number 25 here. Here's number 25. Yeah. Let's all do number 25 together. Okay, let's do this sucker. So I'm going to count slowly. So here's the thing about this. This is written in the sort of compressed, the 8th and 16th note rhythms that Scott Joplin wrote in. Even though modern musicians might be more accustomed to thinking about this in terms of eighth notes and quarter notes. But we're going to do what we see here. So I'm going to count a tempo that's slow. And then we're just going to clap this thing out. Okay, or sing it, do whatever you want. But I'm going to clap, because ostensibly we don't know what the pitches are. I think I recognize it instantly, and I think I know which Scott Joplin song this is. But let's pretend we don't. Let's just clap it out. I'm going to count to 2 at this tempo, and then I want you to clap out the rhythm. Okay, 1. I'll count to 2 measures. 1, 2, 1, 2. I did it that time, and you probably all recognize what it is. But let's do it again. And this time I'm not going to clap. I'm just going to let you try it. Again, I'll give you 2 measures for free, and then you'll come in with that pickup. 1, 2, 1, 2. Let's do that one more time. Same example again. 1, 2, 1, 2. So tell me how you're doing with that. I think the fact that I clapped it out first, and the fact that probably many of you instantly recognized the piece and knew what it was, and therefore you could just do it from memory, that probably helped a ton. But we're going to take a look at some similar rhythms like that in a little bit and see how those go. But let me make some observations while I wait for the chat to catch up here. So yeah, just let me know how you felt about that, how well you did with that, what helped, what didn't help. Some observations about this. Notice how the beaming helps with this, because now we see which notes are on the beat. Do da dun dun, do dun, do dun, da 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 da, and I'm doing that thing, which, Jim, I realize is very similar, right, to that method that you were talking about in the community. That extra sound that I'm making a really awkward sound, and that guy made it sound much more convenient than what I'm doing. I make it sound really awkward. But the idea that you're sustaining a note but making a sound to indicate an event that happens is similar between what we're doing. So Joanne, about not being able to do it clapping. So here's the thing. You saw how much I struggled when I was trying to just tap out a beat and then do a bow motion in my other hand. If it's not a physical sensation that you've done before, it could be awkward. And yes, John, it is the entertainer. Like, I can do this all day long, right? Rub my stomach and tap my head. Why? Because when I was a kid, someone said, hey, this is a fun thing to try to practice. And so I practiced it. But asked me to do something else. Yeah, it also says it in the fine print down there. That's true. But asked me to now circle here and tap there. I guess I can do that, but I have to think about it. Now my hair's messed up, and I wish I hadn't done that. But if I try to do other things that aren't specific things that I've worked on between my 2 hands, it's going to be difficult. And so clapping rhythms is a thing that comes naturally enough to me because I've done it enough now. But if you haven't done that before, it's not going to feel natural, and it's going to feel a little awkward, even if it's not doing 2 things at once. So no, there's nothing wrong with finding unfamiliar things difficult at first. Now, the question is it useful to spend time working on clapping that out as opposed to doing it in your voice if you're comfortable doing it in your voice? That's a good question. And I will gladly accept other people's opinions on that. I don't have an opinion on that. I would say whatever works for you, just do it. If it helps you get the right answer and you're not feeling like you're struggling, great. If, on the other hand, you feel like you're struggling in any way with rhythm, then what you're doing isn't working. And maybe you do try something else, like working on clapping it out. What I'm going to do right now is do those ta-ti and taki-tiki syllables. So let me flip over to that handout for a second. In the handout that I gave you recently, I talk about these syllables where ta is on the beat, ti is the off beats, and ki are the other 16th notes. So I want to plug that in here. This pickup here starts on an offbeat, right? How do we know it starts on an offbeat? How do we know that first thing is on an offbeat? Well, because there's only 2 16th notes there. It only adds up to an 8th. It's got to be the and. So this is ti-ki. This guy here is on the beat, ta. And remember, it's always going to be taki-tiki. So think about each beat, taki-tiki, and which note lines up where. I'm going to go through this real slowly, and I want you to try to do it with me. Taki-tiki. Oh yeah, let me give you the link to that so you can have it up in a separate window if you want. I'll put this in the chat since it is right here. Where am I? I need to get to the right thing. Here I am. There we go. There's the rhythm syllables one. Now you might have trouble getting both of them up at the same time. So if so, just remember taki tiki. Those are our magic syllables. Taki tiki. We're going to use those over and over again. Taki tiki. So where'd my thing go? Right over here. And like this is ta ki, and then the T is missing ki. This is ta, and then the ki is missing T ki. This is ta, and then ki, ti, ki are all missing. This is ta, but it's tied into, so we're not going to say that ta. I'm going to do the ta thing. Same with that one. I'm not really going to say the ta. I'm going to leave out the T. But there's the ta, and then here's the ki, ti, ki, and then ta, ki, ti, ki, and then ta, except it's tied into ki, ti, and the ki is missing, and then ta. So that's how this is going to go. And I'm going to try to do this using those syllables without writing them in, just from that. And I want you to try it with me. So at the same tempo. 1, I'll give you 2 bars again. 1, 2, 1, 2. Tiki tiki ki ti ka tiki tiki ki. Ah, man, I suck. Taki tiki ki ta ti ta. All right. I messed that up badly. I'm going to do it again. This time I'm going to let you do it. And I'm not going to stop when I mess up, because I probably mess some of you up. 1, 2, 1, 2. Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. Let's do that again. 1, 2, 1, 2. Dun, 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 dun. Yeah, John, it messes me up too. I am not claiming that this has crossed the threshold for me of something that helps me. However, that's because I've already developed a certain facility with rhythm. If I didn't already have that facility with rhythm and I felt like I was struggling and needed some additional tools, I think of the tools that are available, this is one of the better ones. And maybe for some people, it's going to help. But you saw how badly I struggled with this. So like now I'm embarrassed. I'm not embarrassed. I don't care. But I'm going to try it again. And I'm going to get this thing right. Taki tiki. So what I'm going to do is just say taki tiki to myself a couple times. Taki tiki, taki tiki, taki tiki, taki tiki. I got to, let me get the first one right. Tiki, tiki ta. If I can get tiki ta right, maybe I'll be on a better shot. 1, 2, 1, 2. Tiki taki kita tiki ki tiki taki tiki ki ta. Hey, that was better. I actually did that not too badly. I'm gonna try that again. 1, 2, 1, 2. Tiki taki kita tiki ki tiki taki tiki ki ta. This is the one that's messing me up. Ki ti. That's the one that's messed me up every single time. So now that I know that, I'm going to be ready for it. And we're going to try it again. I hope you're doing this with me. Don't just listen to me do this. Do it with me. 1, 2, 1, 2. Tiki taki kita tiki ki tiki taki tiki ki ta. So, yeah, I'm going to come back to that. First, I'm going to answer Scott's observation here about the last measure being short. So this is a thing that used to be a thing. It used to be a thing. It is not so much a thing anymore. But this measure is short, right? It's supposed to be 2/4, and yet there's half a beat missing. That is done to complement the pickup at the beginning. So that is a tradition that existed in the Baroque era when people wrote a lot of short dance pieces, and then they just wanted to repeat the piece to allow the dancers to keep dancing longer, or to say, hey, let's repeat this section a couple times, and then let's do this other section and repeat it a couple times. In order for that repeat to work out when you have pickups, there was this convention of shortening the last measure, or if there's going to be another section after this, to actually split the measure up there and have the repeat sign mid-measure going back. So in these sort of short repeating forms, that was really common. In modern music, we don't tend to do that so much. In modern music, we do not tend to bother shortening the last measure just because there was a pickup somewhere. Because think about, like, if you're going to write a symphony that's 400 measures long, just because there was a pickup, 10 minutes ago, it doesn't mean anyone really cares if the last measure gets shortened to make up for it. It just doesn't tend to be a thing anymore. So, but short examples like this are still often done that way so that we can repeat them. So this time, let's actually repeat it. And I'm going to try to do this thing twice, and I want you to try it with me. 1, 2, 1, 2. Tiki taki kita tiki ki tiki taki tiki ki ti ta. Tiki taki kita tiki ki tiki taki tiki ki ti ta. So by writing it out this way, it made it a little easier to see how the pickup connects, and it can help you figure out. Joanna's pointing out, like, when I started off by saying, how do we know that pickup was on the offbeat? Well, looking at how it matches up with its complement at the end of the passage is one way to figure that out. So again, for these short passages like this, being able to match this one with that one can actually be quite useful. So it's a tradition that serves a particular purpose, especially for short repeating forms. But it tends to not be used so much in longer music. Okay, so yeah, that was a nice example there. This idea that each beat is now easily visible. Like, notice here we have taki tiki ki ti, right? That key at the end of that first beat there tied into the next beat. That's 2/16 tied together. Yes, it's the same as an eighth, but by breaking it up, showing each beat individually, now I can see that this beat here is that missing ta, and then the next 16th is the key. And it helps you tell which syllable to put with it if you find the syllables useful. But even if you don't find the syllables useful, and like I said, for me personally, not really, but it still helps you place that note accurately, knowing that this 16th note is on the E, right? The 2E and is the way I would normally verbalize that. Whereas if I wrote those 2/16 as an eighth note, then we'd be looking at the 16th that comes after it, and we wouldn't recognize where in the beat that 16th happened. But by having broken up that 16th broken up that longer note here, basically an eighth note duration, by breaking it up into a 16th note at the end of one beat, tied to another 16th at the beginning of the next, it allows us to accurately place that second 16th there, and then accurately place the eighth after it in ways that there's almost no chance that you would accurately place them if we didn't break it up in these ways. So even though you look at this and say, oh my gosh, ties, that's complicated, the reality is it's going to lead you to the right answer better. So if you're new at this, I'm going to recommend a little method here that I use involving clapping, in which I'm going to actually clap the tied notes, but I'm going to miss. Okay, so I'm going to clap those notes, but instead of clapping like this, I'm just going to miss. Okay, I'll miss a little bit. So when I do that, it makes it really clear that something happened there. I'm not going to like really exaggeratedly miss, because then I'll be late on the next note, but I'll just not actually fully clap. So watch and me listen to this. 1, 2, 1, 2. So I did this little motion of clapping on those beats that were tied into. I did the motion of the clap, but not the sound of the clap. That way I felt the one. And this relates to what I was talking about last week, I think, when I did my bass player salsa impression, where they're never playing on one. It's like and of 2 and 4. 1, 2, boom, 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 boom. And I'm doing this big physical motion to help me establish where 1 is so I don't mess up while I'm doing that, and it doesn't mess the rest of the band up. So now I'm going to try something right now that I used to be able to do, and I haven't practiced it in a while, but I'm going to try it anyhow. By the way, Colin, is a pickup the same as an anacrusis? Yes. Pickup is the more common American term. Anacrusis is the more common British term, but they are, to me, they're both terms that all musicians should know, like regardless of whether you live in the United States or in a British influenced country, then you should probably know both those terms. Whereas the term quaver and crotchet are like terms that you probably won't use unless you're in one of the countries where those terms are used. But pickup and anacrusis, I think everyone should know both those terms. And same with measure and bar. Those are another 2 terms that, in America, we typically say measure. In Britain, you typically say bar, but I think most people should know both those terms. Clapping rhythm nearly led you to fail a music exam. Well, then there's where you practice it. So I definitely practice this thing here. Who decided to, oh yeah, oh Bob, who decided a double note, whole note had anything to do with brevity? Actually, there's a longer note, and it's called a longa. It fell out of use a little earlier, but in medieval notation, like pre-Renaissance, there was longas and brevs, long notes and short notes. And then semi-brev was the shorter note. The whole note was the shortest note value they had. And it was not until quite a bit later on that the idea of faster note values came in. So yeah, back medieval times, longas were the thing. So anyhow, I want to show you this, this is an Afro-Cuban pattern in which I'm just going to play just one chord. Bum, boom, bum, 1, dum, 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 bum. So 1, you can all count along with me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. So now I'm going to do my hands together. Sorry. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I'm not getting that right. I used to be able to do this better. 1. Is a pattern that it was like this, right? Those 2 very specific rhythms, and of 2, 4, and then this, which is like a downbeat. It's like 1, 2, and then a whole bunch of offbeats for the rest of the 2 measures. That pattern is called a montuno. This pattern is called a tumbao, and normally they're not played by the same person. The bass player would be doing this, pianist or guitar player is doing this business up here. But I did enough gigs where I would have to do both parts because it would maybe be just me solo wanting to do this kind of music, or maybe me with a singer, or me with a saxophonist, or me with a conga player, or all, some combination where I was playing in an ensemble without a bassist. And so this was like 20 years ago that I was playing in a band where we did this music a lot, and I worked on that particular pattern of being able, and not just for that chord, but I could do it with any chord. And keep the chord straight. I used to be able to do that because I practiced it a lot. Now it's been 20 years. I haven't tried that much in the last 20 years. So John, the idea of 12-bar blues, and this is sort of this ironic thing. It's obviously an American idiom, blues in general. And then the word bar, when we talk about 12-bar blues, no one in America says 12-measure blues, right? We all say 12-bar blues. So the word bar, to mean the same thing that we otherwise mean by measure, in America tends to be thought of as slang. It's like blues slang. Blues musicians, pop musicians, jazz musicians talk about bars. Classical musicians talk about measures, right? That's the overall sense you get in America, is that measure is the official term, what all the books use. Bar is what the blues guys say. In Britain, though, it's not that way. Bar is just the word. It is the only, that is the word. The word measure just doesn't even show up unless you're reading an American website. So, yeah, good stuff. Anyhow, that little demonstration I just did there of showing this coordination thing leads me to another question. And I'm going to quickly answer Joanne's question there. There is no physical difference between a violin and a fiddle. They are the same instrument physically, but it's also like measure and bar. There is a slang aspect to fiddle, which implies certain styles of music in which you use a violin, but in a particular style, and then in that style it's called a fiddle. And so in that style there's all sorts of associations, but the physical piece of wood and strings is the same thing either way. So what I was going to talk about with this coordination thing is another aspect of rhythm, and one of these things that people struggle with, that people often struggle with, that I want to make you feel better about if you struggle with, and this is for pianists specifically. This whole idea of doing two different things between your hands is hard. There is no getting around that. Doing different physical motions in the two hands independently, unless it's a combination that you've specifically worked on, like this one. Other than, and I don't know if you can actually see what I'm doing, but I assume you can if I back away from the mic, from the camera. Unless you specifically practice that, that's hard. But when you practice it, it becomes easy, right? But any other thing where you need your hands to do independent things is going to be like that, where it's hard at first and you're going to have to practice it a lot. And what this leads to is this thing that pianists deal with, where you're reading piano music and you think, oh, I'm going to practice my two hands separately. Oh yeah, I had another piece to sight read. You think, oh, I'm going to practice the left hand by itself and then the right hand by itself, and then I'm going to put my hands together. Anyone who plays piano can probably back me up on this. That doesn't work as well as you wish it did, right? You always wish, if I practice the right hand alone and then practice the left hand alone, and then all I got to do is put them together. And you find the moment you put them together, it's almost like you hadn't practiced them at all. And that is just a fact of life, and don't feel bad. Now, I'm not saying there's no value in the hand separate practice, but expecting it to magically make you be able to put them together is just fantasy. It just rarely works that way. So my personal advice on hand practice, if you're working on a piece of piano music, is practice the hands separately only long enough to be sure you know all the notes, all the rhythms, and all the fingers you're going to use. Use, which finger is going to play each note, so that when you play that thing, you're playing it consistently, the same fingers on the same notes. But don't worry about doing it up to tempo or anything like that. Once you know all the notes, you're sure, oh, that's a G sharp, not a G, because it was sharp earlier in the measure, etc. And that's a tie, not a slur. And once you've figured out what the rhythms are, what the notes are, and what fingers you're going to use, it's time to put your hands together. So for each hand, work out the fingerings and so forth, but then just start putting the hands together, because time you spend getting each hand up to tempo is going to be wasted largely, because you go to put your hands together and you're going to suck again. And Susan, I would have to guess it's the same with harp. Oh yeah, I thought you said, is it the same? Yeah, I was going to say it's probably even worse for harp, because the hands on the piano often are doing fairly independent things. See, already just that amount of practice, now I got this thing nailed. That's very independent things that I'm doing between the hands. The harp, the way it works is typically not as not as independent. There's usually a little more relationship between what you're doing in the hands, not always, and not always on piano. But I'm going to guess that harp music is typically not organized in that same sort of accompaniment and melody type of thing. And the same is true for guitar. Yes, absolutely. All right. I want to flip over to another piece. I want to look at Victor's version of Let It Be for a second, just to talk about that. We talked about a little bit in office hours, but I do want to take a look at this. He did a really great job with this, and I'm still going to encourage people to continue working on this as well as fascinating rhythm, transcribing and getting these rhythms down. But now, when we go to do this, look, it's so nicely written. We can see each beat. And I'm going to do this thing where I clap it out and I'm going to miss. And I want you to try to do it with me. And we're going to do it real slow. One. So I want you to read along with me. And I know you already know the song, but now knowing the song and seeing how it's written, let's see how those two things work together for us. So I'm going to count to 4 and then we'll go. And it's going to be a slow 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Just that much. Let's do that much again. One of my fake claps threw me off a little bit, and so I made one small error in there. But one nice thing about this way of thinking about these things, one beat at a time, and recognizing that the beaming is helping us there, means if you mess up one beat, doesn't matter. You're back on for the next beat. I think what I did is I put this G here on of a little early. I think that's what I did. So let's just try that again. All right, Margie, glad to have you here. And yeah, we're going to wrap up in a second here, but I just wanted to try this here. So let's try that again. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm flailing a little bit, trying to miss. I'm giving you that as a pedagogical thing, but now I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do something else to say there's a note here that I'm not playing because of the tie. I'm going to try to just do it with a head nod. Let's try that now. 1, 2, 3, 4. I guess this is a slur, not a tie. I've been looking at it either way. So for me, that head nod to just sort of say there's a beat here that I'm not playing because there's a note tied into it, I find that useful. Also for a really prominent rest. If I want to say, hey, I need to validate the existence of this beat without actually making a sound, getting it into your body somehow is my advice. So I want to wrap up here. We've sort of looked at a number of different aspects of rhythm again today. And it's not like that means we're done studying rhythm, right? Rhythm gets super complicated. I mean, what about like triplets? Triplets in this hand. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, bum, 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 bum. Right, that's one of those other things you practice and you learn these little syllables that help you make that. Oh, what a fuss is what I learned. Oh, what a fuss. Oh, what a fuss. Oh, what a fuss. Oh, what a fuss. That's what I learned. So there's all sorts of physical things you can do to practice different aspects of rhythm, and it never ends. We continue to work on rhythm. But as far as studying the theory, we've talked about what we're going to talk about. And so next week, we're going to move on to major scales and keys. So, but that doesn't mean you stop working on rhythm, right? Keep working on rhythm. So that said, let's hear some music to end us out with. Thanks everyone for being here. Thanks for the discussion. Thanks for the comments. And yeah, we're just going to keep at this. And as you can see, even when we're talking about a relatively simple topic, yeah, my system's slowing down. Even when we're talking about a relatively simple topic like, oh, I think I know what quarter notes and eighth notes are, there's so much to get into as far as really mastering the subject. And it's going to be the same with a major scale. Yeah, most of you know what a major scale is, but let's really get deeper into it over these next couple weeks. So look forward to it. See you then. By all means, get together tomorrow for the study hall if that's going to help you kind of practice things out together, discuss things. And I look forward to seeing you next time and having some new things to talk about next week. Bye.